Hi! Have you ever been in a situation where you've been asked to give somebody advice on their paper? Well, if you're in any kind of English class or doing any kind of writing, you're probably going to be in a situation where you have to give somebody some advice. And you might be wondering, how do I do it? Well, fortunately for you, this video is going to answer that question. It's going to give you 7 strategies for peer review. So first of all, let's talk about why we do peer review. You may feel like, especially if you're a college student, hey, I'm just another student. How can I possibly help someone else? I mean, isn't that like the blind leading the blind? Well, actually, it's not. If you think about something like rock climbing, for instance, having another person with you to kind of guide or support you through a process can be super helpful. In fact, it can be essential to your success. And peer review can actually be an essential part of writing success. So let's talk about 7 ways that you can help others and that you can ask for help yourself. First, evaluate expectations. If I were going to go rock climbing, I would first want to evaluate where I'm going. Am I going to be indoors or outdoors? And then I'd want to route out a path for me to get to the top safely. Of course, there might be many different options out there, and if you're a student doing writing, there are a couple things that can help you figure out what you need to do. First of all, the assignment description, a rubric for grading if there is one, and then of course your teacher. There might be information on Canvas, or you might need to talk to the teacher directly to find out what needs to happen in this assignment. If you're helping someone else, make sure that you look at all these resources as much as possible before you jump in and start giving them feedback on the paper, because that way you'll have a better idea of if they're actually reaching the goals that they need to or not. Second, build confidence. Rock climbing is tough, and you know what? So is writing. And so it's important that we build confidence, and most importantly, that we're human. If you're reading somebody's essay and they wrote about how their dad died of cancer, you're not going to jump right in and talk about comma splices. You need to be human first. You need to respond to them and let them know that you really heard what they were saying and that you can sympathize with them or kind of relate to what they've said. You also need to let them know what works. That's the first thing that you want to start with. Say, wow, this part was really good, or ooh, I could really connect with this section. And that goes to the next step, which is sharing connections. If you have any connections or ideas, or wow, this made me think of this, let your reader know. That way they'll have an idea of what part of their writing is most interesting. And last but not least, when you do give negative feedback or critical feedback, which is important, you need to make sure you try to sandwich that around positive feedback. So let's talk about the next step, focusing on content. This is another really important key to giving feedback because a lot of times the thesis, the flow, and the consistency are the things that are really going to help that writer the most. But sometimes our tendency is to focus on the little errors, like the spelling stuff. One thing that might help is this visual. As you can see, content is the big one on the top. This is their overall message, that thesis flow kind of clarity and consistency sort of a thing. Under that is organization, which is also really important. And then we go to sentences, then grammar, and then mechanics. All those little spelling nitty-gritty things are at the very bottom. As hard as it is, we have to remember that we have to resist that temptation to get nitpicky with somebody else's writing. A lot of times word choice and style choice is a matter of personal preference, and we shouldn't try to impose our preference on somebody else. Now, that being said, we do need to be specific and let our peers or people that we're trying to help know exactly what isn't working. And if I was rock climbing, for instance, if I was trying to help my friend get up the wall, I wouldn't say, hey, try to grab that thing over there. I would be much more specific. I'd say, hey, there's a good pink jug off to your left. Make sure you try to grab that. That would be much more helpful. And in writing, the same thing applies. If you're too vague, you might say something like, this is unclear. Being specific and saying, I'm not sure what you mean by they in this sentence. Who is they? That is much more helpful because they have an idea of exactly what is unclear, and that lets them know what to fix. Now, as you're telling people what to fix, do you want to be tactful? If somebody showed up to rock climbing like this, I would definitely tell her, you're not going to be successful. You need to change your outfit. But there are tactful ways to let her know what the other options are. So first of all, I'd want to start with I messages. I think, I feel, I wish. I messages are great because they don't make the other person defensive. Starting with you, on the other hand, you should, or you ought to, or you need to, even can make that other person feel a little bit attacked. Also, another important idea is to use do instead of don't. For example, if I say use a semicolon instead of don't put a comma here, again, that comes off a lot more positive. Connect this to your thesis instead of this is a weak point. Totally different tone. It's encouraging rather than discouraging. So being tactful is super important. Next, of course, is to ask questions. Sometimes the writer that you're working with is just going to feel stuck. They're just not going to know what to do next, and you can help them by asking questions. For example, why did you choose this topic? Or who might agree or disagree most with your argument? Or what's the most interesting thing about... As you ask these kind of questions and get somebody talking, that can help them to realize what they really want to say in their paper. Most importantly, last but definitely not least, is to respect ownership. And this goes along with all the other points that we've made before this. First of all, we need to remember that the author is the authority. As a peer, we give perspective, but in the end, we have to let them decide. And finally, we also need to let them write. A lot of times our tendency might be to grab their paper and make a bunch of corrections right on it. But it's actually much more effective if we take notes on a separate paper or talk to them and let them write and restate our words in their own words, because that helps them to remember and actually be able to use that information in an effective way later. So, we have reached the pinnacle. The 7 strategies. We now know what we need to do for success. So let's review really quick. First of all, we need to evaluate expectations. We need to make sure we know what our goal is, what the purpose of this writing assignment is, and how we're going to get an A on it. Number 2, we want to look at building confidence. We want to make sure that the other person is feeling positive and not overwhelmed. We want to focus on content instead of the nitpicky stuff. We want to be specific instead of being vague. We want to be tactful and use I messages and say do instead of don't. We want to ask questions that help our readers and our writers to think and get through the challenges of writing. And most importantly, we want to respect ownership, because this is their writing. Okay, we've discussed those 7 strategies for success. You're ready to go out and help others. If you do want some more resources, though, be sure you check out the USU Writing Center Handbook and make sure that you check out some cool resources online. There's actually a ton out there, including this video that you can find on YouTube under Nobody Writes Like Me, Peer Review. Enjoy and good luck with writing.